Sandra, thank you for joining us on Shakti Pulse, where we bring insights from industry titans for the benefit of startup founders. And as a 4-time CEO, 2-time entrepreneur, and advisor, certainly a lot of wisdom to talk about today. So thank you.
A lot of learnings. Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And so you've been in the consumer world for your career, whether it's fashion and now in pet wellness and healthcare at PetMeds. Tell us a little bit about your kind of anchor in the consumer world, even though the industries have changed.
I think at the end of the day, anything that you sell to a consumer, anything that you do for a consumer, whether it's a product or service, ends up being the same consumer behavior that you're looking to be able to recreate or to tap into. And for me, it really started a long time ago when I thought somehow I was talented enough to be a designer, which I was not. So I thought I was going to be a fashion designer, and ultimately got into the business and decided that since I couldn't be a designer, that I wanted to go on the business side and become a CEO one day. And so everything that from that point on, and I would say even before that, my parents had a tortilla factory. So I always grew up with entrepreneurial parents, and really out of necessity. They were immigrants. They had this factory. They were producing tortillas for supermarkets, for restaurants, and also there was a retail store. And of course, there was a warehouse. So I would have to work, and all of us worked, and we all would have to work. And I was working in the warehouse. I was picking and packing tortillas and eating them because I loved tortillas, and working in the retail store. And so I kind of knew early on what it was to actually take care of a consumer and what you had to do, what you had to put into taking care of a consumer. You'd have some consumers who were happy and some who weren't. And then you'd have others that you had to go through a store who'd come to pick up, or you'd have to deliver to, and then you'd have a consumer that way. So that was something that was ingrained in me really early on. I also had summer jobs that it was always, unfortunately, sitting, whether it was baking Texas sun outdoors, it was always working with people and always really understanding what people wanted. And ultimately, that's what this is about. It's like, what do people want? What makes their lives easier? And how do you give it to them in the best way possible? And so whether that's a beautiful handbag on the Cuyana side, or whether that's a dress on the DVF side, or if it's for your pet and great supplements that are going to help your cat to be able to live a healthier life. All of that is, again, tapping into what a consumer's needs are on a day-to-day basis. And it's obviously changed in terms of how we reach them over the years, but ultimately it's the same thing, like consumer. And depending on the generations, and depending on certainly what time you're talking about, whether it's 2008, 9, or now in this current turbulent time, but that changes, but the consumer ultimately doesn't.
Yeah, and I want to get into it a little bit later, your thoughts on the consumer today and Gen Z. But in terms of these consumer companies and building, obviously brand is really at the heart of it, and you've built so many successful brands. Are there certain formula or tips and tricks or lessons you've learned along the way when either starting a brand from day one or stepping into a brand like you did as CEO at DVF for founders who are just starting out and trying to build their brand?
Yeah, so I've been a part of a lot of great brands, and I've built a couple of great brands. But and I've been advising a lot of founders who've been phenomenal founders who've built really sustainable, long-lasting brands. And I think that's also just another thing to look at today's current environment and what's happening. But I think brand number one, first and foremost, I started out at Donna Karan, Ralph Lauren, Oscar de la Renta, big fashion companies. They're legacy businesses and brands. But ultimately, Ralph Lauren doesn't change what they are and who they are. There's other brands that I won't name, but that have tried to change over the years, and then they lose their customer, and then they have to retool everything to come back again. Who you are, and what you stand for, that brand DNA is really important and critical to be able to capture that early on, and to be able to see through all the different touch points and all the different channels of communication. And while it might be modernized one day, and might be a little bit of this change to that logo, or a little bit of this change in terms of a color, it still ultimately stands for the same thing. So Ralph Lauren's aristocratic. Donna Karan was always minimalistic New York. If you look at DVF, it was always colorful print. And that DNA is really rich in heritage. And so whether you know it now when you're building a brand and designing it from the beginning, you're trying to design for something that's going to live for 30, 40 years. And you want that sustainability aspect of it. So how you touch a consumer and what that lifestyle is it doesn't matter, again, if it's pet product or handbags or clothing, anything that you're touching, what is that lifestyle that they're living today? And it's so different now because consumers have changed, but what's changed is really that I would say back in 2008, 2009, when all the D2C brands started, that's when all of a sudden we could no longer tell the customer what was on trend or what was fashionable or what they needed to have in their home. It was all of a sudden them telling us. The influencers started. It was only Facebook at the time. I had Selena Gomez was a business that started back in 2009, 2010. And that was the time that there was only Facebook. And then Instagram came and then social media started becoming more and more important. And that's when all of a sudden we were like, wait a minute, they're telling us what's now important. They're telling us what they want versus us telling them no white after September, no this or that, or all the different things that go into it. Fashion runway shows became different. So going back to the brand piece of it, it's all about what you want to stand for, what you want to say, and who you want to really attract. And I think there's been so many great brands within your portfolio who have clearly known how to do that well.
That's such an interesting shift with influencers now kind of dictating trends a little bit more and staying strong to your core as a brand of what you believe in and not letting the...
It's hard. It's really hard, especially as a founder who's creative. And I've had, I'm not the creative one, but I've had partners who've been the creators. And whether that was a founder like Diane or my business partner, Tony Melillo, like that creative piece of it, it's hard because you want to stay rooted in what you do, but at the same time, you see all of these new things happening and new generations and new interests, but you have to stay really rooted in terms of what your expression is and what you stand for that consumer. And ultimately, those brands are the ones that end up just reaping the benefits for decades.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's also even more of a challenge when you are a founder-led brand and you make the decision to step away as CEO. And so kind of curious with the example with DVF, you stepped in as, I think, the first outsider CEO.
By title, but yeah, she had presidents before.
And that for founders, it's such a hard decision and hard to get comfortable bringing in outside executive leadership. And someone else is kind of taking the reins on your baby. How should founders go through that process and really just get comfortable with having someone coming in from the outside?
I think it's like partnership, right? No matter what. And you mentioned Diane, and she was very good about this is a partnership. Let's dream together. Let's think about how we want to do these things. And it wasn't like a dictator of here's what we need to do going forward. It's a partnership. So like anything else, you want to make sure that you have a partner who's coming in who truly understands what you've built and understands what your vision has been for that business, whether that's, the product specifically, the consumer specifically, or whatever it is. So partnership is really important, number one. The other thing is that there's always, no matter if you're a founder business or if you're running a business today, if you have a $10 million company, it's very different than having 100 million, very different than having a billion. You're going to have certain people at certain times that are going to be more important, roll up the sleeves type of entrepreneurial, like wear 15 hats at all times. There's that stage of a business. And then there's a stage where you really need to have real specialists. And so when you get to the point of understanding, like maybe I don't know how to be able to scale this more, and maybe I really do need to bring somebody in who can also lead an organization because there's so much that gets involved. And obviously, being a CEO, there's so many different elements of it. It's hard. It's hard to be a founder, a creative, and to be able to run a P&L, lead a team, build international businesses, whatever it is and however you're growing. So I think it's really about saying, like, at what point in time do I need somebody who can really help us scale and do it in a more proficient way because they're specializing, whatever they're specializing in. And from a CEO standpoint, obviously you've got to have and wear a lot of different hats and you'll have a lot more experiences, but it's a partnership in building for the future. I think it's never one to take away. It's just to enhance.
Yeah, that's a good way to look at it. Are there things that stepping into that role in a partnership with the founder that worked well, that a founder can be thinking about if they maybe are at the stage where they're, ready to bring someone in? Like anything that worked well in your experience?
It's always communication. And there's no, without having any kind of threats, I think it's very much about communication and including the other person in whatever it is you're looking to accomplish and whatever it is that's going on in the business. So I think that I would never take away, and there's been a lot of founder-led businesses that I've been involved in. That one specifically as well was, a 45-year-old brand. So a long time with a very powerful, high-profile individual who was the founder of this business. So you have to be very sensitive to that and make sure that you're respecting and valuing that. And I think the other side too is that the founder respects and values the business element that somebody brings in, and that there is a split in terms of somebody needing to have the accountability and the empowerment and the authority to be able to run. Because oftentimes when you're a business with a founder, people want the founder. People want to know what the founder wants, but you've got to be able to have someone who has that business head. So there's mutual respect, communication, and I would say probably the third would be just similar vision and making sure that you're constantly just checking in with yourselves to make sure that, are we going in the same direction? Do we see eye to eye? Because we know that there have been plenty of examples with splits between founders and either co-partners and co-founders, or CEO and founder splits. But it's hard. It's hard, I would say, on both sides to do that as a founder, to just let go and know someone else is going to take your baby. And obviously from a CEO standpoint, coming in from the outside, knowing that this is their baby.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's also hard to know when the right time is. Most of our CEOs were very early stage, but it's probably different for everyone. How do you know when it's the right time to step away? And is that when you start trying to source the right person, or are you building, as a CEO, you're building those relationships from day one that you might want to you want these people to be in your orbit that you might want to bring in later?
Yeah, I think I'm always a proponent for networking and meeting people and having people in your back pocket, whether that's, for whatever role it is. I just always want to make sure that I'm thinking about it ahead. And so I think any founder should be thinking about that, making sure that they're taking advantage of networks, of LinkedIn, of meeting different people or looking at different companies and saying, that was a really great exit from that person, and who helped them get that way, who helped them along the path, at what stage, and then understanding, kind of putting them into your mix and say, I'm going to come back and meet that person again. So always looking and thinking ahead. I think absolutely take advantage of the time to meet people. I value founders who do that, because I think it's really wise to be able to go out and just meet people. See, do you get along with them? Is there something that you think would work together in the future? Because they might be great for one founder, but they're not great for you. So there's definitely time that required, and you don't want to be reactive. You want to be proactive. You don't want to get to the point to where your business is all of a sudden either crumbling or feels completely overwhelming, and then you need somebody, because then you're really just rushing to find someone. Not always the right time, not always the right way.
Yeah. And on the people topic, so you've scaled businesses from 0 to 100 and beyond. At the very early stages, in terms of hiring, it's the number one challenge from the startups that we work with. Finding the best talent when you don't really have much to sell employees on besides your vision. Mm-hmm. What works in terms of that initial team build out? In your experience?
Oh, it's hard.
Yeah.
It's really hard. I'm doing it now even still, and it's, multi-hundreds of millions of dollars, but it's hard. Finding the right people at the right time and building around, especially if you come around, like what I'm doing now is a turnaround. So it's a different story, but it's also similar, because I call ourselves a public company that's a startup. And similarly, you're looking for people who have the ability to wear multiple hats. That is one type of personality. Like somebody who is completely siloed and wants their day to go a certain way, that is not going to be something for a startup, right? That you can't necessarily have someone who's just focused on that one thing, because you've got so many different hats to wear. And another thing that I would say is there has to be, in terms of team building, to me, it's always been finding people who are like-minded, but different enough. Because you can't have everybody be one way. If everybody is completely type A, one direction, there might be some battles. Mm-hmm. And having a good blend and a good mix. And for those of you who've kind of had to go through schools and private schools and how those schools for kids end up putting together a class, it's very similar. You can't have all one type. So you need to have a mix and a good blend of different personalities, but people who really are obviously engaged, because you're right, you're not selling much at that point, just a vision. So you need somebody who really wants to grow, and wants to take on more than what they can take on, or what you ever imagine somebody taking on. It's hard though.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're doing it, but still, and you'll make mistakes, and I think everybody does, but it's just a matter of and constantly reiterating what that vision is so that people also continue to believe.
I mean, super interesting that you're doing that right now in terms of joining a public company that is in kind of, as you mentioned, rebuild. What's that like? And are there certain principles from your experience with startups that you're trying to bring in as you've been in this role for a year plus?
Yeah, so I have been in this role a year. It's similarly a legacy retailer. It's been around for almost 30 years, had a specific DNA to it, needed to modernize. So we are turning it around, transforming it into a more modern type of health and wellness platform for pets. But with all of that, I would say that no matter what, when we look at the passion and why we're here, the purpose and the passion is really what drives our decision making. Number one. Number two, it's about moving quickly as we can, failing fast. I'm a big risk taker. I'll take risks, but let's figure out if we're going to fail quickly and then try to move on. I would say one thing that definitely ends up being a challenge is if you get people, again, I mentioned like single siloed thinkers versus somebody who can be a little bit more free and flexible and perhaps wear more hats. When you have a corporate type of person and they have an entrepreneurial and everybody thinks a little differently, and this one might be a little bit more or a little bit less rigid or a little bit less focused, and another one is more focused, you have to find ways to put people in the right places and also find ways to be able to give them the opportunity to be successful with it. Because if you put people in the wrong place, they won't be able to succeed, whether you're a startup and you're a founder-led business or not. Right? If you don't give them the right tools to be successful, they're also not going to succeed. So whether that's continual training, whether that's very important KPIs that they have to be able to achieve, job descriptions, like all of that, it sounds so much like minutia, but you're like, well, okay, I already know that. But at the end of the day, I'm still doing this. I'm still going in and making sure, did we give somebody the right job description? Are we making sure that they have the right tools to succeed? Is it a people or a process issue when things aren't getting done or aren't going the right way? If it's a process issue, let's go down and find the root cause. Like no matter what, that never goes away. So whether you're doing it as a founder-led business at $0 or $1 million or $20 million, you're still doing it much, much later in different ways. So there's all these little nuances, obviously, to people and building teams, but then there's so much that has to go into the actual operations. And so you need people, different types of people, different times and different stages.
Yeah. And one of the biggest things also at that early stage is building your board. And choosing those people is extremely challenging, but also very important. I think you've been on 7 boards.
Yeah, you know this.
did my homework. So tell us a little bit about that, especially from the founder perspective. If you're just starting to build your board, maybe you're at seed or Series A, how do you think about who the right person is? And maybe that right person at your Series A is different from who it's going to be at the next round. But if someone's new, what do they do?
Well, I had a problem saying no, clearly. So that was one thing. But I started joining boards during the pandemic, and it was just, there were a couple of things for me that were important. One was, could I add value? 2, was I going to continue to learn? And 3, was I passionate about that industry or that business? And so that's my side of it. Like those are the prerequisites that I had to be able to say, this is what's interesting. Ended up being a lot of things that were interesting. And it was all around different VC-backed and PE-backed brands and or public companies. So everything around consumer, the ecosystem is what I got involved with. And I was able to see legacy retailers who'd had 75 years in business that I was on a board of a PE-backed company, or a startup in the SaaS space that had been through multiple different CEOs and had to do, again, more turnarounds, to another one in the ad tech space that was on its way to acquisition. Very, very different leaders, very different founding histories of those businesses. And I would say that when I was approached about being on those boards, I gave you my prerequisites, what I was looking for. There's also those prerequisites. What do you really need? And to your point, like, what should you be looking for? Similarly to what I said about people and talent, you should always be meeting people and thinking about, could that be somebody that could help me scale? How do they do that? Are they available? How often will they be available? Is this somebody that I can tap in for what type of questions? How do I think about, is it international growth? Is it something that's going to help me with wholesale relationships? Do they have department store background? Do they have this broader network? Do I need to raise more capital? And this person's really going to help me in that different way. So thinking and parsing out all the different areas in which you might need some help and ask those questions. So then it becomes, okay, well, these are areas that I'm going to need some help. I'm going to need some advice. Now, who can I actually rely on to give me that qualified advice? I can pick up the phone and contact when I need them, and or can actually make those connections when I need them. Because there's a lot of times, and I've done it too, but there's a lot of times that you think, yes, I can make those connections or I can make those introductions. And if somebody gets really busy, then they don't always do it at the time that you need it. So I think availability is a big part of it. It's like, how much time can they give you? And how much time do you need? How much time are you going to give to them as well? Because the flip side is, there was a founder that I was advising for years whose brand is phenomenal and has done an incredible job, but she also wasn't reaching out to me. So I was not reaching out to her as much. And so there was a little bit of a gap in communication of, do you want me to reach out to you? Do you want to reach out to me? And I think that goes into, again, communicating your needs and making sure that, are you setting up scheduled meetings and calls, or is it just wait for me to come to you? How do you need that person to be able to show up in the room for you?
That's such a good point. I think a lot of founders don't know how to use the board, and maybe it's like they do a quarterly meeting and it's more of a presentation to the board, and then they walk away and they're like, well, we didn't really actually work on the things that we had questions on. How would you advise maybe it's that founder to use the board effectively, whether it's in the actual meeting in terms of how it's structured or on the side, whether you mentioned the quarterly catch-ups? What's some advice?
Yeah, I mean, I've had situations where I speak to founders weekly, monthly, quarterly, sit on boards where there's quarterly meetings, and then sit on boards where you have weekly meetings and then a quarterly meeting. So I would say that, one, it's always about preparation, getting things in advance. So as a board member, you want to have time to digest information. You want to look at the data. You want to be able to ask the right questions. So you need time for that. On the flip side, if you feel like you're always preparing board decks and you're never getting out of board decks, then also that's not very productive. So I actually prefer and like when there's a limited amount of a deck that you're putting together, but there's more one-on-one conversation. So you can actually have a one-on-one discussion with each of the board members before even going into that board meeting. So you can say, look, here's what I'm going to share with you. This is what I need to get out of this meeting. This is what I'm hoping that, you'll come prepared with, because these are the questions that I'm going to be really asking you to think through.
The meeting before the meeting.
The meeting before the meeting, the call before the meeting. It could be 15 minutes, it could be 30 minutes, but having that one-on-one call to be able to say, here's what you're going to hear, and here's what I need you to think before coming into this meeting that I need answers on. Because otherwise what happens is inevitably you have another meeting because you didn't get it done that meeting. And then you might have another meeting because then something else comes up in between that time. So have a real plan of what you need to accomplish, what you need decisions on, what you need input from. And then the rest is just like, I'm giving you information to digest, right? So I want you to give information about what my business is and what's happening so far. But otherwise, like whatever you need back from them, I prefer personally the one-on-ones.
Yeah, that's great feedback. And do you think that's effective kind of from day one, even if, founders just starting out and they just have a very small board, to kind of create that hygiene early on?
Yeah, because you're also building the relationship and you're building a rapport, and you're also getting that trust between the two of you so that when something big does come up, and you really do need them on your side and you need them backing you, like they know enough at that point in time to where it's not a question, right? Instead of, oftentimes board members themselves will have conversations without the founder or without the leader of that business, and you want it to be symbiotic. And so I think no matter what, early on is better, just so you start building that rapport and building that trust factor.
Yeah.
And boards and teams, same thing. You have to have trust. You need to have trust amongst all the constituents and making sure that everybody understands what the needs are across the board.
Yeah. And like you said, there's good times and bad times. Is there the bad time examples are always like more, you can learn more from them. Is there an example of like the bad times, or just when something was kind of going off the rails? that you found an effective process to manage, whether it's leaning on the right people or like a personal leadership skill that got you through a crisis, which I'm sure happens every day for founders?
I mean, it's consumer, right? So you're constantly going through the roller coaster ride. And no matter what year, if I go back and I think about it, since 2008, 2009, it's been a roller coaster ride. There has been a lot of change in consumer, and that goes down to a lot of social media, a lot of change in terms of, look at today's retail climate, in terms of just brick and mortar retail and how many thousands of stores have closed. I don't even know what the total is now if you think about the last 10 years.
Walking around New York City,
10,000 a year. So if you just think about that, there's a lot of change, new generations coming on, whether it's Gen Z, millennial, now you've got Gen Alpha, everybody has their different way of communicating what they're looking for. And then it's no brick and mortar. No one wants to go to stores, and everybody wants to go to the stores, you know. Online has become a thing. Now it's become bigger, but then it's more expensive. So there's a constant roller coaster ride in whether or not you're going to have these highs and lows and how you do that. For me, I've been through it so much now, and I've had enough time to where it bothers me less. Not that it doesn't bother me, but it bothers me less. And I'm able to kind of say like, okay, let's still go back to figuring out where do we want to be? And then let's work backwards to how we're going to get there. Because there's going to be the inevitable roller coaster dip. Nothing is great forever. And there's plenty of examples out there to see. And so consistency, for sure, consistency across the board, really staying focused. And I do poorly at this because I like to also think through a lot of new things and new initiatives, but it's consistency, really staying focused and making sure that the communication, so everybody understands from a team standpoint, is really going to help you get further. And also staying as calm as you can as the founder and leader, knowing that this is going to pass. This will pass.
So on that topic of brands, we've talked about kind of what makes a brand work well. Anything or any stories or anecdotes from your experience of brands that didn't work well and learnings from founders about that in terms of what didn't click?
Unfortunately, too many, right? But I want to go back to one thing though, because maybe this is the converse of what you're asking, but I have a friend, Andrea Lisbona, Touchland. I don't know if you just saw Touchland's acquisition, $880 million exit, 10 years in business. The reason I want to go back to that is because I think there's been so many businesses, the ones that I've seen that have not succeeded, and then the ones that I've seen that have succeeded are the ones that have stayed so focused. She had one business and one product, and that's hand sanitizer. And she just stayed and stayed and stayed. And she always she kept saying to herself and saying to everybody, she wanted to be the Apple. And I'd be like, what do you mean she wants to be Apple? Like, it's computers and it's hand sanitizer. But I realized only afterwards, if you look at the design, it really is like what Apple did do to computers, she did for hand sanitizers and really disrupted the space. But she stayed so focused and just kept layering on and layering on, whether it was layering on additional scents, but in the same bottle, layering on additional distribution. And that focus, I think what I've continued to see is just that focus is what creates success. And the ones that don't and look, I've been there and I could say now I'm thinking, I better go back and be very focused. But the reality is the other ones on the flip side are the ones that decide it's like squirrel, this day it's this or this year it's that. And I'm going to try to do this. And look, there's a lot of examples. I could talk about a very big example like Michael Kors as a company. As an example, they have had many years where they were really, really strong, and then others where they can't figure out who they are because they've tried to change too much, or it doesn't make sense in terms of who they are or who their customer was. So now they've lost a bit of that. And so there's plenty of examples that go across different lifestyle brands and businesses, but I think it just goes into the focus, understanding who you are, who your target customer is, and what you mean to them, trying to mean as much to the consumer that you have as possible.
And speaking about new brands, Gen Z is a complicated but very interesting category of consumer. And we at Shakti, we're investing in tomorrow's IPOs today. So we want to know what's coming next. Can you tell us a little bit about, in terms of Gen Z, what trends are you interested in with that cohort going forward?
It's interesting because when we started the Selena business, Selena was a millennial. And we were dealing with the tweens at the time that were the Gen Z of today. And it was very early on that we saw that this customer was just different, right? Obviously, they have the internet at their disposal. They have everything possible. I have 3 kids who happen to be in this generation, so I also see how they consume things, and they're still consuming things. Where I thought this is going to be the sustainability focus, this generation's not going to want a lot of stuff. Not really the case. They're still buying. And obviously we now have buy now, pay later. So it gives them more options to be able to buy. And there's all these tools now that we have so that they can purchase more or rent more. I think that what I've seen and what I really like is that brick and mortar is never going to go away. It's just you don't need a 10,000 or 15,000 square foot space. You can do it in 12, 1,800 or 2,000 square feet and creating these experiences, because it really is about attaching emotion to the experience of shopping. People want to do it together now as well. It's become a form of entertainment. And this generation is very much about that. So it's about having an experience for them, whatever that experience is that you're giving them. It has to be a destination. And then you have to redo it and redo it. Look at Rode, right? They've continued to be innovative. They've had really great pop-ups. They've had really great, the phone case that has the little slide in for the lip gloss that they have. So they've done things in an innovative way, but they've kept the interest going. And the shopping as a community. I think the community, it's an overused word, but the community building is really important. And the community shopping, because this consumer, in my view, wants to do things together.
I mean, it seems
they want to go back into stores and they want to do it together.
Yeah. I mean, post-COVID, I didn't think that would ever happen. But it seems like with brands today, storytelling is more important than ever. I'm just thinking about, like, there's so many new water brands and it's still just water, but they all look very different and they're raising a lot of money and people are buying liquid death. How, as a founder and an entrepreneur, do you hone your story, whether it's for people you're hiring or for investors or customers? How have you practiced and gotten great at that?
Gosh, it is a constant challenge. And it is something, again, I'm doing now today, trying to figure out, like, is it copywriters? Is it AI? Like, how much are you doing to be able to resonate? Some of it is like, how much research do you do about your customer and, how much do you have to invest? But ultimately for founders and, a founder in a business like a Ceremonia or a business like a Mod or a Touchland or so many others that we can list in terms of where those businesses have been, like, it really is rooted in, like, what was your purpose? What was the reason for being? Ceremonia, bringing Latin American beauty to the market and really focusing in on that. Or, I just mentioned Mod, bringing sexual wellness to the market. You've got a list of them, like, what does that mean and how do you show up? And then putting your brand guidelines together. Are you a happy brand? Are you a minimalistic brand? Ralph Lauren, I go back to my Ralph Lauren example that I was sharing before, but Ralph Lauren's never going to be black and white. They'll have some blacks and white, but you're going to have red and pink and green and all the preppy colors. And same thing, Balenciaga would never be Ralph Lauren in those colors as well. So finding and defining who that is. And you can talk about Poppy in the drink and food and beverage category. You can talk about Gia, a lot of the trend now in terms of food and beverage really being a little bit more vintage and Fishwife. And you just look at all that. Like, what do you represent? Bringing and pulling your brand guideline together also is a tone of voice. And including that tone of voice in there is like, we are and we're not. So that anyone and everyone that comes into your company or that you outsource knows what that tone is, what those colors are, what the logo is, what the font is, like all these different things that go into the brand guideline is really important to have, even though it seems so unimportant in many ways. It's actually really important for longevity. So having the ability to tell people, like, this is what we stand for. We're a happy brand. Use these words. You don't use these words. We're a emotional brand. We're a sexual wellness brand. Like, these are the things that we're going to use, and we're going to be unashamed about using those words. So it's copywriting is so, it goes from a founder standpoint. I wish I could say I'm the founder of the business, because then I could turn my own words into it. But when you are the founder, you have the ability to take it and make it your own words. Like, what are those words that are most meaningful? Talk to, like, your friend. And that's what it is. And I'm trying to encourage even our team now in a bigger company, but one to say, like, this is human to human interaction. This is pet. Like, we love our pets sometimes more than our own kids. I'll speak for myself. No, I mean, I love my kids, but it's really such an emotional attachment that you have. And so let's talk to them in the right way, not be clinical, but you can decide if you want to be a clinical brand versus an emotional brand. Those are all the different components, but it's more important if you get it in and you get it locked in from a brand guideline standpoint than having to figure it out later.
Yeah, it's
so
definitely
early on putting it in place.
Yeah, and spending the time doing it is so important. I think founders move very quickly, but the storytelling is a key aspect.
Yeah, I mean, it's another overused word in many ways, but it's an important one because we do have to tell stories and really beautiful stories. And we started doing this as an industry, again, going back into, well, ads used to be that, but it was an ad. It was a one-time. But then in 2009, 2010, with the rise of Warby, Parker, and Cuyana, and Away, and all these they started telling stories, right? You start telling stories. And now we've got to get better and better at telling these stories so that you come into your world, you come into this world, like you want consumers to come into your world. So how are you defining your world? Is that visual, language, the places you have your pop-up, the places and locations that you decide to put up your brick and mortar store? Are you in Asheville, North Carolina, or are you in New York City, Madison Avenue? Like, these are all ways in which you communicate what your brand stands for and who you are. Do you want somebody that's going to walk in from Madison Avenue, or do you want somebody who's going to walk in from, Austin, Texas? They're different things. Look at Kendra Scott as an amazing brand that has continued to get better and better. What's her core been? Consistency in terms of what she represents, and that real idealism of community, and truly, truly focusing on her community and how she was going to build that. And she's continued to what's over $1 billion brand now. And so she's continued to expand. I think the Yellow Rose is another brand now. She's another brand for men, but it just is, it's been one consistent theme. I happen to have known her when she was very early on, not a profitable company, and was able to turn that around to be a consistent theme of like, here's what I do well, and this is what I'm sticking to. I think that's another part, that here's what you do well. Find what you do well and find what resonates with the consumers, and then stick with that and just keep expanding on that.
Yeah. I mean, you've advised so many founders and given a lot of examples of that. And you're also as a Shakti Titan. So thank you for your support of our portfolio companies. Is there a moment that stands out of advice that you've given, you feel like you give over and over again, that you're kind of like, this is your pull up the chair and listen moment, that maybe we can wrap with? It's just advice for a founder.
I would say that don't let others sway your thinking. Trust your instincts. Those instincts will be right. It doesn't mean that you can't listen and be informed, and it doesn't mean that you can't try certain things as well. But in big decisions, as a founder in a business, and instincts about like who your customer is, or, I had somebody that I was advising that I was like, this doesn't resonate with me, or I think this doesn't resonate with the customer, or this is too expensive a price point. And she was like, I'm sticking with it. It remains to be seen, but she's continued to grow, but you got to stick with it. I respect her for coming back and saying, you know what? I don't agree. I do like what I have right now, and I think this is what's going to resonate. And that's the only reason I started this business. I'm like, go for it. Right. And so now you just have to go out and see whether or not that can actually resonate with the consumer and actually ring the register at the same time. So stick to your instincts, really focus on what you stand for and who you are and what you want to represent as a brand and business, and be really hyper-focused on every touch point that comes out, because the consumer notices it all.
Such great advice, and a perfect point to end on. Thank you so much. Thank you for joining Shakti Pulse and sharing your wisdom with our founders.
Thank you. Thank you. Appreciate it.